Hey guys, today's video I am really excited about. I have been prepping for this video basically for the last month. So all throughout January, I tracked every single eyeshadow palette that I used throughout the month. And I'm going to share with you what those palettes were. This video was very much inspired by a couple people. So I know Lauren May Beauty did this type of series in 2022, and I thought it was so interesting. But what really gave me that final push to do this project for myself was a subscriber who actually has also done this type of project herself. And she messaged me on Instagram and sent me like the spreadsheet that she used. And if you want to go follow her, she does a lot of like panning content over on Instagram. Her name is Kaylin and her Instagram handle is MakeupLins. I'll link it down below. But thank you to her for encouraging me to do this type of project for myself, because this makes so much sense, because I'm not really forcing myself to use any particular palette. Basically, all I'm doing here is observing my palette usage habits over the course of a month, and I'm planning on doing this all year long. I'm not sure if I'm going to do monthly updates. I might do them like every other month, we'll see. And by the end of the year, we'll be able to see which were my most used palettes, which were my least used palettes, were there any palettes that I didn't use at all throughout the year. I think it'll just be really interesting to have some actual data to look at when it comes to my palettes. I would love to do this for my entire collection, but to be honest, I don't think I have the willpower to actually go through and track every single product that I use every day. But with palettes, I think that's a good starting place. So there are 14 eyeshadow palettes that I used in January. I'll go ahead and give you like a quick sneak peek of what they are, but I'm going to go through each one. And I'm going to start with the ones that I used the most, and then we'll work our way to the ones I used the least. So there are two palettes that I used 5 times in January. One of them was an older palette, one of them was a new palette. This first one was the Nomad Cosmetics Verona palette. This, I did film a 3 looks 1 palette with this that I can link below. Those were 3 of the uses, and then I used it 2 additional times other than that. I also filmed a short using this side of the palette, really these 3 shades right here. I did like a halo eye. And for any of these palettes, if I've filmed a look with them, whether it's a short or regular video, I'll link those below if you want to see the palettes being used. But this would have to be one of my favorite new palettes that I've tried in a long time. I had never tried Nomad before, and I was really impressed with the formula. I think the color selection is so fun. I did receive this palette in PR, and when I first opened it up, I was like, I don't really know if that color story really speaks to me. I wasn't feeling super excited to try this out for some reason, but I was like, let's go ahead and film a 3 looks 1 palette and just see how it goes, because I feel like the best way to really get a feel for a palette for me is to do like a dedicated 3 looks or 5 looks or 1 week of looks, just to really see like what the palette can do. And I'm so glad that I did that, because I was wrong. I actually found that I really like this color story, especially this side over here. The dusty, the grays and the dusty tones, the cool tones, and really the shimmers are what really do it for me with this palette. Like, these are so glimmery and just so much fun. The only thing to keep in mind with this palette, if you're thinking about buying it but you're on the fence, maybe this will help you decide if it's a good palette for you, but the shimmers in here don't pick up well on a brush, or at least not on a dry brush. Maybe on a wet brush they would work well, but to me these shimmers are best applied with a finger, which is fine with me because that's how I pretty much apply every shimmer most of the time, so it doesn't bother me. But if you like to use just a regular dry shader brush with your shimmers, these aren't going to pick up well on that type of brush, and you're going to be very underwhelmed with the result that you get. So just keep that in mind. But shimmers are beautiful, and the mattes in here, even these really bright colorful mattes, are surprisingly easy to work with. Like, I was a little intimidated by some of these hot pinks, but they were really easy to blend. I feel like I barely had to work at all to get them to blend into my skin and look good. So really impressed with that, and that is why that was one of my most used palettes in January. My other most used palette in January was a much older palette. This is the Shared Planet Polar Bear palette. This was in my everyday makeup drawer in January, and it's kind of nice to me that I had 1 new palette and 1 old palette that I used a lot throughout the month. Now, a couple of the times I used this, I think I only really dipped into this shade down here, this Cub shade, because it's so... I love this shade. This is, I mean, it looks like a very basic color, but this is one of my favorite colors in the palette. It looks like nothing in the pan, but this is the perfect transition color. It's that perfect, like, rosy, beige, taupe kind of shade that's my favorite type of color to just kind of start out my crease with so many different looks. That is like a great just color to start with. So that was definitely my most used shade. I also love, and I always mention when I talk about this palette, but this shade right here is so pretty. Avalanche. It's like a duochrome, like blue to purple sort of shade. It's so pretty. And I mentioned in another video that may or may not already be up, but I'm thinking about depotting the shades in here that I really like and just decluttering the rest, because what I've found is that really, like, when I go through my palette collection, the main reason that I keep this palette around is those two shades. The other mattes in here are very stiff. They work well, but they're just not my favorite type of texture. I don't mind it so much with this light color because I feel like I can really just like go ham and not have to worry about it looking messy or anything. But these other dark mattes, that type of kind of stiff texture, they sort of just end up looking patchy on my eyes, so I don't love that. And the other shimmers in here are kind of just okay, but I don't necessarily feel like they add a whole lot to my collection that I don't already have in other palettes. So long story short, I'm kind of thinking about just depotting those two shades because those are the shades that I really love in here. But I'm not sure yet. I might keep it. I might keep the whole palette too. We'll see. But I did use that 5 times, so I'm really glad to have gotten some good use out of that. I usually try to roll this into my everyday makeup drawer in January because, which just goes to show how long I've had this palette. I think I've had it for like 3 years now. But it's a very January palette to me because it's wintry but not holiday-y. So I think it's good for like when the holidays are over but it's still winter. It's a good palette for that time of year. Anyway, so those were the only 2 palettes that I used 5 times. The next palette I used 4 times, and this was the other palette that was in my everyday makeup drawer, my custom Lethal palette. Love this guy so much. I really picked out the colors in here so that it would work well pretty much any time of year. And I really thought of the top row as like the wintry row because it has these like frosty blues and like a periwinkle. I just think of winter when I think of those shades. And I dipped into these 2 shades the most this month. I did film a short using mainly this palette, and I think I also used that light beige shade in the Polar Bear palette as well. But it was a very frosty, soft, cool blue sort of halo eye that's supposed to be kind of like a snowy sort of eye look. There was another look I did where I just kind of went nuts and used so many different eyeshadows on my eyes, but I really like the way that the look turned out. I can pop that on the screen as well, but I did use a lot of the shades in here. I think I used all 4 of these top shades if I'm not mistaken. So had a ton of fun with that, really just further solidified my love for this palette and for the Lethal formula. It's really kind of like Nomad, like just very easy to work with, user-friendly but still very pigmented, intense shadows. So love that, and I definitely plan to put this into my everyday makeup drawer a few more times just throughout the year because I really want to make sure that I use it at least a handful of times per season because, you know, this middle row I feel like really makes me think of summer. The greens and like the pastels make me think of spring, and then all those neutral shades would be great in the fall. So definitely hope to get even more use out of this all throughout the year. So that was the only palette I used 4 times. The next palette I used 3 times, and this was another new palette. This one I bought in January, the Wet n Wild Color Icon palette in Call Me Sunshine. I also shared this in my most recent favorites video, so you already know how I feel about it, but really impressed with this palette. I mean, I knew I would be because, I mean, it had been a while since I tried Wet n Wild eyeshadows, but I remembered their shadow formulas being one of my favorites, and I think they've even stepped up their eyeshadow formula in the past few years since I've bought from them. The shimmers in here are super smooth and buttery, and this shade, I've mentioned, that's probably my favorite shade in the whole palette, but it's a very duochrome, like twinkly, sparkly shimmer. If you packaged these shadows into like an Urban Decay Naked Honey palette, I would be like, wow, this is really good even for Urban Decay, because normally Urban Decay shadows are just kind of so-so to me. This, to me, is better than Urban Decay. And I did have the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette in the past. To me, this is better from what I remember of that palette. The shades are just more interesting. The shimmer formula is much smoother and almost creamier, whereas Urban Decay's Naked formula is very dry typically to me. So yeah, love that, especially for those mustardy brown tones. I like this type of color story all year round as well. I feel like it works just about any time of year because it's very neutral, but especially in the summer, I think these kind of like bright, almost fiery, yellowy type of colors are especially fun to wear. So also very much looking forward to continuing to use that throughout the year. I received a bunch of new palettes in PR in January, like way more than usual. It's been a little overwhelming. I've been trying to balance using my older palettes because I want to use those too while also testing out these new palettes, and I still feel like I haven't fully gotten to the point where I can review a lot of these new palettes, but I have several from Ace Beauté, a couple of Sigma palettes, you'll see. But this palette I used twice in January, and I think I received this in January, so that means I've only used it twice so far. But this is the Ace Beauté Floral Vintage palette. First of all, this outer packaging, sold. I mean, I don't even have to see the shades inside. This is so pretty. It looks like a book. And with all of the Ace Beauté palettes, they have the title of the palette almost like a book on the spine of the book. And so if you had like a big collection of these, you could have them out on a bookshelf and you would be able to see what each one is just from the side, which I think is cool. Anyway, let me show you the inside now. So here's the inside. This is a really big palette for me. You'll notice, I think this is actually the biggest palette that I own. I don't normally go for palettes that are so large, like just with so many shades. What is this? 6 times 4. It's a 24 pan palette, so that's definitely my largest palette. Now, I definitely think this palette could be condensed a little bit because, as you can see, there are a lot of warm browns in here. Now, there aren't any shades in here that are like exact duplicates or like so close that you can barely tell the difference. Like each of the browns does have a different undertone. Like this one's more warm, this one's more reddish, this one's like very mustardy, this one's more neutral. So they all are different. But the first time I used this palette, I actually did film it for a short that I've posted already. And I like the way the look turned out, but I have to say I was shocked by how orange every single shade that I used turned out to look on my eyes. I started out the look, I wanted to just start out with like a very like light beige kind of color in my crease. So I went for this shade right here called Spray Rose. And you would think just looking at that would just look like a light beige in the crease. But it went on so like orangey yellow. I was like, okay, I guess this look is going in a different direction than I expected. I was applying that shade and you would think I was applying this one. Like that is how yellow it turned out to look on my eyes. I was just stunned, like really. And so then I went into this shade thinking, okay, that's a pretty like neutral brown. I mean, it's a little warm, but it's a brown. So I went in with that shade to kind of deepen up my outer corner. And orange, again, like so orange. And I'm sure part of that was because it was blending in with this shade, which was already looking so orange. And so from there, I think I just decided, all right, well, I guess we're just doing an orange look today. So then I went in with this shade, Golden Orchid, which looks like more of like a copper. That went on even more orange on my eyes than it looks in the pan too. So from there, I was thinking like, is every shade in here orange? Like, is this green gonna look orange on my eyes? I don't know yet. I haven't tried it, but like it was pretty wild. I was pretty just honestly impressed with this palette's ability to just turn orange instantaneously like that. But the next time I used it, I was wearing it in which video was it that I was wearing that? Oh, it was in my video about why I'm dropping the cruelty-free label. With that look, I went more of like a purpley route, and I actually really liked the way that look turned out. I didn't use any of the warm browns in here. I started out with Cosmos, beautiful shade. That's definitely one of my favorite types of shades to wear. And then I think I went in with Aster, this like deep plummy purple, and on the lid I wore Cherry Blossom, if I remember correctly. I didn't film that look, but it was a pretty simple look. So fortunately that look didn't end up looking orange on my eyes. I mean, I would hope, because I didn't use anything even remotely orange. But anyway, that's my experience with this palette, having used it twice. I haven't used every shade yet, so I really don't feel like I can fully review a palette until I've used every shade at least once, hopefully more than that, but that's where we are with that. I still like it though. Like, even though I was a little bit put off by my first experience with it, I still don't dislike it. And I do like orange shadow. I actually think orange and peachy colors look especially good with blue eyes because they really make blue pop. So I can work with that, but I was surprised. So if you were getting this palette thinking that it looked neutral with like a couple pops of green, no, it is largely an orange palette. So yeah, but I am excited to keep playing with this. I do think that in the spring especially, this is going to be so much fun because, I mean, you know, floral, flowers, spring, and I kind of just wish there was more green in here though, because, you know, you see those 2 pops of green and you're like, oh, it has a pop of green. But I would love for them to have replaced a couple of these like warm oranges and browns with like a few more greens. Maybe even a green shimmer would have been nice. But one thing I will say is these shimmers, especially like calendula here, these are so pretty. And that's what I've observed with so far all of the Ace Beauté palettes that I've tried. But their shimmers to me are where they really excel. They're, you know, not super flaky, which I appreciate because that just makes them easier to work with. But like, look at that sheen that those give. I mean, oh, so pretty. They're metallic. They have a beautiful sparkle to them. And a lot of their shimmers, not so much in this palette, but in the other palettes that I've tried from them, they're like unexpectedly shifty. Like they don't look super shifty in the pan, but once you apply them, it's like, whoa, that's like practically a multi-chrome. Like that is impressive. So anyway, that's my thought. I guess I feel like I just gave the most long-winded explanation on that palette, but just an interesting experience all around. Still feeling mostly positive about it though. Alright, so all the other palettes that I used in January, I just used once. While we're talking about Ace Beauté, I'll go ahead and talk about these two. So these two I also used once in January. We have the Ace Beauté Aura palette and the Flare palette. So the Aura palette, this came out in December as part of like their Cosmic collection, I think it was called. This one of the two, it came out along with Envy, which is the more blue and green one. This one I didn't use at all in January, but that's that one. So this one, I don't think I filmed or even took a picture of the look that I did with this one because I think it was just a random day. I wasn't really like doing any filming that day. But this is another example of just amazing shimmers, like especially this shade. I think I did wear this shade when I used it this month. The shade Halo. That is such a gorgeous shade. Like look at the shift there. Whoa. Like, are you kidding me? That is so pretty. But I know I used the shade Soul here, which I really do like that type of shade, especially in the crease. And then Halo, that other duochrome shade. And then I think I might have even used this green in my inner corner. It ended up looking kind of odd. The thing with this palette that I find kind of challenging is it's really two different types of shades. You've got your purpley pinky shades, and then your like chartreuse colors, basically, like this hazy shade, Sunburst, even Nimbus has kind of like an olivey green sort of undertone to it. And I'm not entirely sure how to pair those two types of colors together and have it look good. So that's really the challenge with this palette, but it's kind of nice to have a palette that pushes you out of your usual, you know, color patterns, because really I don't often wear a lot of these types of shades, but I think it's a lot of fun. Like I do really like this color story, and I think this is going to be especially fun in the spring. You know, pink, purple, green, those are all springy colors to me. So yeah, fun palette. Definitely not one, like this again was sent in PR. Definitely not one that I would have bought for myself, you know, but I'm having fun playing with it. So there's that. And then the Flare palette I used once, and this one I did film. It was in like a get ready with me testing some new to me makeup. And this palette, this has been out for a long time, and this is the new formulation. They did reformulate, I think, all of their palettes last year. I haven't tried the old formulation, but this is the new formula. And once again, I really stayed in my comfort zone when I used it, but I used these four shades: the brown, this shimmer, this sort of dusty rose color, and then aubergine. Again with the shimmers, man, like even in the pan, that shade looks so pretty. It has this like really soft, rosy lilac sort of undertone, and then this beautiful like bright champagne shift. Like, do you see that shift there? It's really hard to have the camera do that justice, but that shade is so much fun, and I think those are probably going to be my most used shades in this palette. But as I said, I had been eyeing this palette for years. Like, it's been a couple years that I've had my eye on this palette, but now that I have it, I'm a little intimidated, I have to say. I'm not quite sure what to do with the rest of the shades. And, you know, because they're all very bright. We have a lot of different colors going on in here. We've got like this really bright, almost neon green, some really bright oranges, reds, turquoise. Like there's just a little bit of everything in here. It's kind of like, I think I said before, it's kind of like a twist on a rainbow palette. Like you pretty much have every color of the rainbow in here, but each color has a little bit of a twist to it. It's not like just that straight color, you know? But I think it's good for me to get outside my comfort zone and use some really bright colors. This year, I really want to get back to experimenting with colorful eyeshadows. I really enjoy playing with color. I think I'm just afraid that I'm gonna mess up the look just because bright colors are more challenging to work with than neutrals. I mean, if you're doing a neutral look, you're almost always going to end up with a decent look. But with colors like this, you know, you're not guaranteed to end up with a look that is cohesive, especially if you're not super experienced with bright, colorful shadows like I am. So I wanna get over that fear and really, you know, push myself to play around with different colors and different color combinations and even different like shapes or just types of eye looks this year that are out of my comfort zone. And I've always dipped my toe into color, I feel like, pretty consistently over the years, but this year I really want to not just stick with the same old styles and colors. That's all. Okay, now a couple of the older palettes that I reached into this month were both from ABH. So I used Sultry and Subculture. Sultry, I think I must have used it because it was still in my everyday makeup drawer at the beginning of the month. I don't even remember what look I did in January, but I know I used this a ton in December, and I'm really happy to see just more dips and like visible usage in these shades, because prior to really December I hadn't used this palette. Like, this palette didn't look like I'd used it very much, and I hadn't used it very much, so I feel like now I have a much better feel for this palette. A lot of great everyday colors in here. There's a lot of really soft, subtle looks you can do with this, but there's also a lot of dramatic, bold, very sultry looks that you can do for like a more glam type of look. So even though it's older, discontinued, etc., it's still a great palette. Now, Subculture. I used this once in January after realizing that I don't think I had used it at all since we moved last summer. I kept this through my big moving declutter because I was like, okay, I want to keep this around and just see if I get more use out of it in Seattle. I really haven't gotten much use out of it. Maybe I used it one other time that I don't remember, but I did use it once in January, and I was it was mainly because I was forcing myself to use it. I mean, I was excited to use it, but you know, I had to intentionally be like, okay, we're using this palette today, because I actually used it in my most recent Patreon video where I was doing a full face of some of my least used products, and I was like, all right, we gotta use this because this is definitely one of my least used palettes. And you know, the look that I did with it, I'll put a picture on the screen of what the look ended up looking like. I used a single shadow from ColourPop on my lid, but from this palette I used Dawn, Roxy, and I think All Star. Those were the three shades I used, and I just didn't feel like the look I mean, I liked the look that I got, but the shades that I used in this palette didn't give me anything different than what I could have gotten in so many of my other palettes, so maybe it wasn't the best test run of this palette. I don't know, just lately I haven't been feeling as inspired by this as I once did. So that's that. That's all I have to really say about that. So just a few more palettes. This little quad I used once, but this is the Hard Candy Purr quad. Purr as in like P-U-R-R, as in like a cat, which is adorable. Definitely, like, the name of it certainly does speak to me, but I think the quality of this is pretty good. This shimmer right here is really pretty. It's a little bit flaky, but you know, that's okay. I mean, it's a very inexpensive quad. I think these quads are exclusive to Walmart, like in stores, because I tried to find them on Walmart's website and they were nowhere to be found. So I don't really know what's up with that, but if you have a Walmart store near you, you might be able to find them. A little bit flaky and dry, that shimmer, but it is definitely my kind of shimmer. You know, it's a nice mid-toned taupe color, so that's really pretty. And then, you know, I love a dusty matte rose, one of my favorite types of shades to use in the crease. So overall, and then this shimmer is just fine, and this matte is also just fine. Like, there's nothing really wrong with this palette. I did feel like when I used it, it almost wasn't as flattering on my eyes as I would have expected. Like, it almost kind of gave me the look like I had a black eye or like a bruise, which is weird because normally these kinds of cool rosy tones I really like on myself, but maybe it's something about just the specific undertones of these shades in particular. Now, granted, I've only used this twice. I also used it once in December, but I think I only used like the two lighter shades that time. So I need to give it a few more chances, but so far I'm not really sold on these hard candy quads. I've also tried the Bare one. That's this one right here. That one I was not impressed with at all. Like the mattes just like barely showed up. I mean, I guess it kind of holds true to the name, Bare, barely there. I mean, maybe that's what they were going for. I don't know. But that one I just felt like wasn't great quality. I do think Per is better quality than Bare, but still need to keep testing that a little bit further. And then I have 3 more that I haven't even used yet, so hopefully I'll use those soon. Maybe by the end of February I'll be able to give you more thoughts on those quads. I did use my Profusion Mauve palette once in January because I knew I was planning to roll this into my project pan in February, which I did. So I think the one time I used it though, I didn't even use it on my eyes. I just used this shade as a blush. So that was the one use I got out of this in January, but hoping to hit another pan in here soon. This is actually the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes today. But yeah, I anticipate that I will use this way more in February. I've actually already used it 3 times in February. I'm filming this on the 8th, so I'm already on track to use this a lot more in February. In fact, I predict this will probably be my most used palette for the month, but we'll see. I also received a very generous PR package from Sigma. It was the first time I've ever gotten PR from them. And, you know, I've had a little bit of a rocky relationship with Sigma. I mean, not literally, like, just my own personal feelings about their products have always just been kind of somewhere in the middle. Not a huge fan of their brushes, but they did send over quite a few of their eye brushes, which I hadn't tried many of in the past, and I am actually really enjoying a lot of their eye brushes. I feel like the type of bristles that they use work better in eye brushes than face brushes for me. Like, the face brushes, I almost find the bristles to be too slippery, but with eye brushes, I feel like it does give me a nice, like, really, really silky, smooth blend that I enjoy. So far I'm liking the eye brushes better than the face brushes. The face brushes aren't bad, but they're just not what I would pick if I were buying expensive brushes. So anyway, back to the palettes. So these 2 palettes, we have the New Mod and the Ambiance palette. I used each of these once in January, so once again, I don't feel like I have used them enough to really give a review. But Ambiance, I think I used this in my video where I shared like makeup techniques that have changed the game for me. I think this is the palette that I used in that video, and I did really enjoy it. The only thing was, and this was my issue with the Enchanted palette, which I bought a while ago, is the deep mattes especially are just a little bit patchy. They're kind of difficult to work with for me. The lighter mattes are totally fine. The shimmers are a little bit hit or miss. Some of them I feel like you absolutely have to use them with a glitter primer for them to really show up, but when you do, wow, they are stunning. Like this shade right here, especially Marigold, that is so pretty. But when you swatch it, it just kind of looks meh, but if you layer that over a glitter glue, it's gonna look incredible. So I do have to say though, I really like this color story. In the past, I would not have said that. Like in the past, I would have been like, oh, this is such a, like, who needs an all brown palette? But now, I actually really like brown eyeshadow way more than I used to. And it's kind of nice to have one palette that's just dedicated to that type of look. So yeah, even though the palette is kind of all variations on brown and taupe, and a little bit of bronze and gold, I feel like there's still a lot you can do with this palette, just looking at it. Like there's a lot of different tones. You have cool browns, you have warm browns, you have even like a rose gold. So I just feel like there's a lot that can be done with this palette. So I am excited to keep playing with that, testing that out more. And then the New Mod palette, I also filmed a short with this. I don't know if this is what they intended, but I feel like it has to be. With the name and the packaging, I feel like they had to have made this with the ABH Modern Renaissance palette in mind, because, I mean, it's got that same type of fuzzy, velvety packaging, the same, like, light pinky mauve color, or similar color. It's more pink, I think, than Modern Renaissance, but obviously this looks a lot like Modern Renaissance on the outside, and New Mod. It's like new Modern Renaissance. That must have been kind of what they were going for, I would assume. But this color story I also really like. I feel like this is a much better, or at least a much more current take on Modern Renaissance. It's really like a toned down version of Modern Renaissance that's more focused on like those berry and mauve tones, which is really what I loved so much about Modern Renaissance. Modern Renaissance also had like a lot of warm tones. It had like that orange color. Those I wasn't as into. So this, I do think, to me, it is a nice kind of almost reimagined version of Modern Renaissance. Like I said, I only did one look with it. Again, I had the similar type of feeling about the dark mattes the time that I used it, but everything else I enjoyed. And these shimmers, like, some of these look so almost glossy in the pan. This shade looks so beautiful in the pan, but look how it's swatched. Like, super sheer. I think, just like I said, it's just the kind of shimmer that you need to apply over glitter glue, and then you'll be very happy with how it looks. So those are the two Sigma palettes. Hoping to use those a few more times in February so I can really get a good feel for them. The last palette that I used once in January, it's funny, I don't even remember using this, but this is the Kaja Beauty Bento in Chocolate Dahlia. I actually did just roll this into my everyday makeup drawer for February because I was thinking, I actually have several Kaja products in my everyday makeup drawer right now because a lot of them are very, like, they have, like, heart shapes and just reminds me of Valentine's Day, and this one with the name Chocolate, I felt like it was good for my Valentine's Day themed everyday makeup drawer. But this is a really cute little trio. I really like this packaging. It's kind of fun. A little annoying sometimes to, like, open up which shade you want, but it has a deep brown, a medium brown, and a light shimmer. The shimmer in here is really pretty. Like, you can even see in the pan. It's just glossy, very shiny, so pretty. And, you know, just kind of like a basic little trio, but I have had a good experience with this every time I've used it. The shades are very easy to work with. I also really like that it's a trio, but it essentially takes up the same amount of space as, like, one single shadow. Maybe a little bit more space. But if you compare this to, like, the Charlotte Tilbury Eyes to Mesmerize cream shadow, I mean, look at that. They're the same size. The Kaja one's actually even a little bit smaller. So I kind of like that. It's very streamlined packaging, really travel friendly. I actually did travel with this in December. I just like that it takes up so little space, so that's really my favorite thing about it. But the shadows inside also I found to perform very well. So I'm looking forward to using this more in February. I feel like I've said that about a lot of these. I hope that video was fun. I had a lot of fun just throughout the month tracking my uses. I don't like tracking uses in project pans anymore. I used to, but I found that it just started to become a chore. I think mainly because I felt pressured to use certain products, but with this type of project where I'm tracking my uses, I'm allowed to use whatever I want, and I almost feel like I'm getting rewarded for, you know, just adding another use into my spreadsheet. It makes me feel like I'm getting a little sticker for using one of my palettes, and I'm getting to feel rewarded for using any of my palettes. It doesn't matter if it's an old one, a new one. Using any of my palettes means I got one more use out of one of my palettes, and that's always a good thing to me. So I really like this kind of, like, very low pressure, really no pressure other than to remember to mark my usage into my spreadsheet, but that I enjoy doing that. But anyway, I'm feeling really excited for this new series, project, whatever you want to call it. And let me know if you would like to see updates monthly or quarterly. I kind of feel like monthly would be good because we had a lot to talk about today. So I feel like if I waited even longer, there would be too much. But thank you all so much for hanging out today. I hope you had fun. If you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up. If you want to support my channel, you can check out the Patreon or the channel membership. And otherwise, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will talk to you very soon in my next video. Bye.